This next feature is going to seem flat out miraculous the first time you play with it. What it allows you to do is select a region of an image and move that selection to a different location and then automatically fill in the background. You can see that I'm working with a flat image file, and I've gone ahead and drawn a rough selection outline using the lasso tool around this model laying in the grass. And I'm including a little bit too much information here. In other words, there's a little bit of grass boundary between her and her shadow and this dandelion background. Now, if you're working along with me inside this sample file, you can either go ahead and draw your own selection outline using the lasso tool, or you can load the one that I've created for you in advance by going up to the Select menu and choosing the Load Selection command. And that really should be it. The document option should be set to womanandgrass.tiff, which is the current file. The channel should be set to the one and only alpha channel, which is lasso selection. You want the invert checkbox off. The new selection radio button should be on, and that's it. Then click OK, and you'll have the exact same selection you see in the video. Now, if I were to go up to the Move tool and drag the selection to a different location, I would leave a background colored hole in the model's wake, which is obviously never something I'd want. What I want Photoshop to do is to be smart enough to fill that region in with grass and dandelions so it looks as if the model was actually photographed in a different location. Well, you can do that now. Using this new tool, you go to the Spot Healing brush, click and hold, and you choose Content Aware Move. Now if I drag the model to a different location, you can see that Photoshop is analyzing the image and using Content Aware Fill in order to fill in that hole. Now all is not necessarily perfect at this point. I'll go ahead and press Control H or Command H on the Mac in order to hide the selection outline. If you look closely at her hands, some of it's been cut away, and I believe we have some grass seeping into her hair as well. We've got this repetition of her dress below the shadow, and then worst of all, we have her eyes repeated in her feet, and her toes have disappeared. So, probably just about anyone would be able to tell that this image had been edited. Go ahead and zoom back out. Fortunately, you have the option of adjusting the adaptation after the fact. So there's this adaptation option here, which determines how the moved object adapts to its new background. And you have the option of going very loose. So in other words, if you have a lot of edge details, so you have a very generous big selection outline, you may want to go very loose in order to allow Photoshop to eke the details into that edge. In our case, it's not going to work very well. Her face becomes something of a mess, and we more or less entirely lose her legs. But if that doesn't work, if we have a very tight selection outline, then we can go with very strict instead and see what Photoshop comes up with in this case. Now, based on my experience, it's not going to be perfect. We're missing a little bit more of the hand, in fact. We have that repeated dress edge, and we're losing some of the front of her body. However, her feet are intact, so we no longer have the eyes and the toes. All right, so what I've discovered about this feature is if it doesn't quite work for you, as it hasn't for me, then go ahead and press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo the change, and then press Control-H, Command-H on the Mac in order to bring back the selection outline. I'm going to grab my lasso tool here, and I'm going to add to the selected area by pressing the Shift key and then dragging pretty high over that knee like so. I'm going to increase the size of the selection around the head and hands, maybe increase the selection around the front of her body, and then also increase the selection downward. So you just basically want more of that background region selected. You don't want to go too far though. Because this tool relies on Content Aware Fill, you want to make sure there's a lot of background region outside of the selection outline. All right, let's try it again. I'll go ahead and switch over to the Content Aware Move tool again. I'll press Control-H or Command-H to hide that selection outline. And now I'll drag her to a different region inside the image. Photoshop will go ahead and display that progress bar. And now, after all is said and done, we get a much better match for this scene. All right, notice up here in the options bar, we have another option called Mode, and it can be switched between Move and Extend. Let me show you what that looks like. I'll go ahead and switch to this other image that I have open. Let's say that I want to take this block of grass here, and I want to extend it to the right, so I want it to be wider. Now, I don't want to transform the block of grass because that would stretch the blades of grass, which would look unrealistic. Instead, what I want to do is this. I'll go ahead and grab the rectangular marquee tool. This couldn't be simpler, by the way. Just select about half of the grass block like so. Then switch over to the Content Aware Move tool once again. And instead of having the mode set to move, I'm going to change it to extend, and I'm going to go ahead and drag the grass to the right while pressing the shift key, and that way I'm constraining my drag to exactly horizontal. Notice at the intersection right there, we have a little bit of weirdness going on, and of course the blades of grass don't match at all. However, after I release and Photoshop runs its calculation there, it actually pretty much rewrites everything. You can see it rewrites much of the deselected area in order to make that selection match. Now, in a case like this, you might find that very strict doesn't work so well for you. May not. If it doesn't, obviously, once again, after the fact, you can still change that adaptation setting. I'm going to try very loose just so we can get the opposite effect and see what Photoshop comes up with. And in this case, completely rewrites that grass detail, and it gives me what looks to my eye to be a better result. Now, I should warn you, neither of these features are perfect. They're not going to always work. They're going to work with certain kinds of images, not so well with others. They work very well, however, with things like white backgrounds, which you see here, and generalized backgrounds like this that don't have a lot of specific details going on. But the good news is that they can deliver pretty darn good results very quickly here inside Photoshop CS6.